I've always been fascinated by the notion that the great preachers of the church have provided some content to the history of jazz, the vocabulary of jazz. Because of that, I've asked students to look at and listen to the words of Dr. Martin Luther King with the intention of picking up additional vocabulary. Not only that, the words, the intention, the history of his speeches is important to the history of jazz. So I set out to prove musically by notating and transcribing a speech of Dr. King's that this was true. So my purpose of transcribing was to discover the musical elements of his delivery, but not only that, to learn the words of Dr. King. And part of this was prompted by interviews that I had watched on YouTube of Ornette Coleman in his discussion of his philosophy of grammar music, in which he discusses that there are thousands, if not millions, of ways to describe one thing in all of human language in slightly different ways. So I set about transcribing, listening to, and learning all here and now. And there were several things that I needed to find out. And there was a process for doing that. First, selecting an appropriate speech, listening, internalizing, making some decisions about context, and then doing the transcription, analysis, and composition. And you'll see to the right, the speech in words is transcribed. So in selecting a speech for study, I chose All Here and Now. I was looking for a short example of a very clearly identifiable form. The speech itself describes each of the words, all here and now, and their meaning in the civil rights movement. And I was also looking for something very expressive. In listening, I attempted to gain a general overview, understand the words, and to know the speech, to begin to internalize the audio and answer some musical context questions. And I found that there was a resting tone of C and that he spoke in the C blues, and delivered in the C blues. The tempo was about 200 beats a minute, quarter note, and was in 4/4 time. The audiating process was to bring the speech into my imagination and to begin to label tempo, rhythms, tonality, pitches, small melodic fragments. And then in transcription, the first thing I did was to simply transcribe the rhythm with a snare drum. And I did this in Sibelius over a click at quarter note equals 200 in 4/4. After transcribing the rhythm itself, then I moved the rhythm into a melodic state, and I did it for guitar. And later found that acoustic bass was more effective. It was much more like the human voice.
We don't need to utter but 3 words to tell this nation what we are talking about. They aren't big words. You don't need to have a great vocabulary to utter them. You don't need to have a philosophical bent to grasp them. They are 3 little words. But we want to let the world know that these words describe what we mean and what we are determined to do about racial injustice. One is the word all. We don't want some of our rights. We don't want a few token handouts here and there. We want all of our rights. The other word is here. There are some people who say that we need to go back to Africa. And then there are some others who tell Negroes in the South, leave the South. You can't be free, so get out. But down in Alabama and Mississippi and Georgia and South Carolina, we are saying something else now. We want all of our rights, and we want all of our rights here in Alabama and Mississippi and South Carolina. Then there's a third word. It is the word now. We're not willing to wait 100 years for our rights.
So in analysis, there were some really interesting things that came out. One was that there was a blue third in the melody, and there was a continual return to a resting tone, C. So the blue third was E flat. Great use of space. Obviously, the dramatic moments had to do with the use of applause as each important point was made, but there's also a rhythmic space that was important. The other thing that was striking, and maybe I was looking for it, but there was a sense of a 1-4-5 outline, similar to blues. The beginning was in C minor, and there was an initial high point that brought us to F. And then there was a next high point that brought us to a G, 5 of the C minor. And then there was an ultimate high point of a sharp 5, when he says, we want them now at this hour. So in recomposition, some of the rhythms felt a little bit stiff to me and didn't really swing, which was what I thought I should be looking for. I placed West African 6/2 feel below the meter, the melody, and the rhythms of his voice seemed to pop in a very dramatic way. Then I began to look for color to emphasize the word. Each time his voice would make some new harmonic implication. Continuing this composition, I feel like I need to clear some space for the melody of Dr. King's speech so that the meaning comes through clearly. Some things I'd like to do in the future with this, learn to perform the speech on my instrument and make the melodic and rhythmic content part of my own musical vocabulary. Perhaps create a small band composition of this and to continue to work with the spacing of the recomposition. In the end, there would be a recorded release of this on my next CD. So please keep checking back to see how this project is coming. I find it fascinating, and I'm hoping that it yields some great results. My hope is that there would be some portion of this completed by Martin Luther King Day or sometime very close to that for a premiere performance.